Hi, and welcome to the Dr. Z and J.W podcast brought to you by Provenzano's Deli in West Haven. I'm J.W. Stewart, veteran broadcaster and journalist with nearly 30 years experience. I've worked at ESPN and NBC, and these days I teach at the University of New Haven. And I'm joined as always by Dr. Z. How are you, Sheahon?
Hey, J.W. I'm Sheahon Zenger, Director of Athletics at the University of New Haven, previously at Illinois State and Kansas. Prior to that, many years of coaching college football, most importantly for legendary Bill Snyder at Kansas State.
And we are grateful that all of you are watching here today or listening to us on our podcast. If you're watching, we are available on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And if you're listening to the podcast, we're available on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play. And Shay, and I'm very excited for our guest today. I mean, we're always excited for our guest, but we're really excited for our guest today. Our guest today is Kenny Coleman, who played baseball and basketball at the University of New Haven. He's in our Hall of Fame. He was a student athlete on our campus back in the mid to late 1980s. His claim to fame, and it's become more popular recently, is that he played minor league baseball for 1 year, 1994, with Michael Jordan on the Birmingham Barons. And if you pay attention, I think it's in episode 7, which you were telling me off camera that you had a chance to watch. There are a couple of cameos of Kenny alongside MJ in The Last Dance. We just finished up on Sunday.
Yeah, I tell you what, I've enjoyed watching that documentary, and I think it just set a record for the most watched documentary in history, which the whole pandemic has helped that. But what interesting times we live in, and I think all of us are having a little bit of Zoom fatigue and a little bit of quarantine fatigue, but there's some positives that come out of this. Things we do in our free time. My wife is even asking when the next episode is coming out of the docuseries. I'm like, wow, okay, this is but it's neat. These are memories we have.
Absolutely. Now, is your wife asking you when the next episode of the Dr. Z and J.W. podcast is going to be?
I don't really tell her. She's listened once or twice, and in our life, I've done a lot of public speaking, and she's avoided most of those speeches. She gets nervous. She'll give me some critique afterwards. So just like this, it's best if she just doesn't know. My kids watch it, but I kind of keep her in the dark about it.
This is 2 podcasts in 2 days for us, Shane. It's a new record for us.
I was telling you offline, that also means I've shaved 2 days in a row. But, it is what it is, right?
Yeah, you got to be camera ready. I actually didn't shave today. I still have the makeup on, as I always will now when we're doing the cameras. I confessed to you and everyone else yesterday. So our theme today is certainly basketball and Michael Jordan specifically, and we'll bring Kenny Coleman out in a couple of minutes. He was very kind enough to join us. I know he's done a lot of interviews recently because of his connection to UNH and MJ and our state. Dr. Z, we know that your background is in football coach or football player. Did you play basketball growing up, and were you a Michael Jordan fan at all?
Basketball was my first love. My dad was a basketball coach originally, and I was a gym rat at Fort Hays State. My dad's office in the School of Education was over in the HPER building with the practice gyms. The Fort Hays basketball players kind of brought me up from 6th grade on. They'd include me in their scrimmages and games, and still breaks my heart that I gave up basketball for football. But football came before basketball in the season, and I had some great success there, and it took me with it. And I wouldn't have it any other way because of the people I've met and the role that football has played in my life. But, man, basketball still kind of makes my heart beat a little bit. Yes, I was a Michael Jordan fan. My boys and I fight about, LeBron versus Michael. Well, now they're learning who Michael was. But I'm a little older, so let's go back. I was a Dr. J fan. And then you throw in the Larry Bird and Magic Johnson era, and that's kind of, for me, where those were my guys, right?
Yep. I agree with you 100%. Growing up in Rhode Island, so I'm a fan of all the New England teams, especially the Celtics. And in the 1980s, the Celtics had a heyday, right? They won 3 NBA championships in the 1980s. They lost a few others to Magic and the Lakers. I had 2 posters in my room as a kid, as a teenager, two of basketball players. I had some baseball players and stuff, but 2 basketball players. It wasn't Michael Jordan. I had Larry Bird, obviously, again, when you're in New England, you have that in the 1980s. But the other one was John Stockton, and I know you're a big fan of Stockton, the longtime point guard of the Jazz.
He was part of the docuseries last night or the night before I was watching, and I hadn't forgotten him. But he's just, out of sight, out of mind, and just loved the way he played. So fundamentally sound, and just carried himself with class and character, and, a great role model for guys our age as we were coming up.
Yep. I never had a poster of Jordan on my wall, but I always respected him. I always enjoyed watching him play. Like you, for me, it was Magic and Larry, right? And those were the greatest. And then Michael Jordan came along and, he blew away what the greatest really is and set the bar.
Yep, truly. That's true. There's always some little factoid I throw at you. It has to do with some bizarre hook in the background. And I've talked a lot about Doug Collins on these podcasts because of the Bulls and so on and so forth. I had the benefit of building a statue of Doug at Illinois State, along with his basketball coach, that's for another time to talk about, who was the first African-American Division I basketball coach in America. So it was of them together. Very unique relationship, beautiful story. Well, the artist who did that for us, his company did the Michael Jordan statue outside of the arena, in Chicago. Yep. So we would go study it and then talk about what we wanted our statue to look like. And, that's a far cry from being around him, although Doug did introduce me to Michael at Doug's Hall of Fame induction and spent time with him. And there's a real relationship there, is shown on the docuseries. So that's my Michael Jordan stories right there.
So you met Michael Jordan once, is that right then?
Once. He's just a classy guy. That night I met Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Meadowlark Lemon, which was the trifecta for me.
That's pretty good. Well, you've met MJ once. You've had a brush with greatness. I've never met him, never had the opportunity to interview him, done plenty of highlights of him, certainly. So let's bring out our guest today. And he's somebody who saw Michael Jordan up close and personal for the 1 year that Jordan was playing minor league baseball back in 1994 for the Birmingham Barons, which were the AA affiliate of the Chicago White Sox. Our guest today is Kenny Coleman, who was a four-year starter at the University of New Haven, both basketball and baseball. He played from 1984 to 88. He's in our Hall of Fame. And again, with the Last Dance documentary having just concluded on Sunday, this seemed to make the most sense to bring Kenny out today. And I know Kenny's done a lot of interviews recently and has appeared and made some cameos in this documentary, The Last Dance. But I want to talk to, we'll bring Kenny out from the green room, and he's been very gracious to join us. First of all, our Hall of Famer from the class of 88, the University of New Haven, Kenny Coleman. Welcome to the Dr. Z and J.W. podcast.
Guys, thanks for having me. Or as I like to say, I played back in the day when we had short shorts and long socks, not the other way around as it is now.
Love it. Love it. That was the style, Kenny. That was good stuff, man. That was good stuff. It's coming back, though,
That's what I hear.
So Kenny, I'm guessing you had a chance to watch the entire documentary of The Last Dance. What did you think of it?
Oh, gosh, it was a fantastic series. I mean, I've said it's the series that saved the quarantine for sports fans. It gave us something to watch. I loved how you saw Michael. I mean, one of my favorite scenes in there reminds me of who he is. That scene when he's in the locker room, he's got the cigar in his mouth, the baseball bat in his hand, and he's plotting B.J. Armstrong's demise for the next day, right? And so, I mean, just the most competitive person I've ever met, and you could see that throughout the series.
And you were able to catch yourself in the documentary a couple of times, right? You made a couple of cameos, I believe, in episode 7.
I did. You kind of had to freeze it to see me. I mean, if you went away for a beverage in between, you might have missed me. But I was on the bench with him, and I actually was at home plate when he hit his first home run. It was quite an exciting time. But I'm number 25, standing there waiting for him at home plate, and then there's another scene where he's kind of getting loose in the outfield, and I'm back there behind me. And actually, I didn't even see myself in that one. My two sons, who are now 16 and 13, they're the ones that saw it.
Oh, wow.
They get all excited, right? They point, Dad, there you are.
Yeah, but they're tired of hearing Dad's stories. They want to make their own.
Well, there's so many Michael Jordan stories to talk about. Let's start with the home run that you mentioned. He was waiting for a long time to hit that first home run. He dedicated it to his father. He was very emotional. I like the story that you told because you had a unique angle and a unique perspective. Please tell us the story of Michael Jordan's first home run and what it was like.
Well, so, what you saw in that year of baseball with Michael is the same thing I think that they said a lot during the documentary, and that's how hard he worked. He showed up early. He stayed late. He would come in and hit before. He'd hit right before the game, play the game, hit afterwards, and what have you. So it was a long time coming. He had a 300 batting average, I think, through the first couple weeks of April, but if you were there and you're a baseball guy, most of those were bouncers to short that he beat out. And it really took almost the entire season. It was the last month of the season where he hit all 3 of his home runs. It just took almost an entire season for him to really start to drive the ball. And, that night that he hit the home run, it was a packed house in Birmingham. And like it usually is, it was soupy and swampy, 96 degrees with heavy air. The ball didn't travel back then at Hoover Met Stadium. And, you could just see him hit it. And it was almost those of us who were I was in the on-deck circle, but we kind of looked at each other and said, did we just see what we thought we saw? And then, of course, the crowd went nuts. And, he made a relatively slow jog around the bases. I thought he might sprint, just for sheer excitement.
You thought it was like the natural, right? That's kind of
I was waiting for the light tower to come down. It was that kind of magical swing.
Kenny, I'm just kind of riding the sidecar today, watching. JW's got a list of questions for you, and I'm afraid I'll bounce all over the place because I want to ask you about, Michael. I want to ask you about playing 2 sports at UNH. I want to ask you about, all your experiences in minor league baseball as well, because I'm just fascinated by that. I think it's one of the great niches in American sports, and I think just to the fact that you played 2 sports, Jordan did for a while, think of some of those great athletes that we have so much for. Bo's kind of the quintessential 2-sport guy. Tell us about that, juggling 2 sports in college. And is that part of why you came to UNH, and how did that play out for you?
Yes. Well, thanks for that question. It is. I mean, I've always been a guy that, even to this day, if I get a free moment, I'm going to put a ball in my hand. Mm-hmm. So I was used to playing nonstop. I smile sometime when these kids say, I need a break so I can go jump in the pool and all that. Somehow I figured out a way to do that and play 2 sports. But at UNH, it actually was Stu Grove, who was our basketball coach at the time, who came down and recruited me for basketball. And I actually walked into Coach Porky Vieira, Coach V's office, said, hey, Coach, I'm not a bad baseball player either. I'd love to come down and try out. And, I'm sure he's like, yeah, sure, kid. Come on. Practice starts in tomorrow. Uh-huh. And so I got a chance to walk on in baseball. I've told the story before. I was really fortunate as a freshman. Wasn't so fortunate for Jim Ferguson, who's a Hall of Famer in baseball as well, and was our team captain my sophomore year. But Ferg broke his hand early on in the fall. It was game 1 or 2 in the fall, and that gave me a chance to play and be able to show what I could do. And so we came back in the spring that year. I got a chance to play second base, and Jim moved to third base. And as always with Coach V's teams, we were successful. So, life on campus for me was it was just every day there was something, and I like that. Mm-hmm. Had one day off in between, usually between fall baseball and basketball starting is a day or a week or so, as I remember. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, it was something from the time I arrived on campus until, May, when it's time to go back. And for baseball, we usually made the World Series. We made the World Series all 4 of my years, so we didn't end until June. Wow, it's impressive.
Yeah, what was that experience like, Kenny? Being able to go 4 straight years to the NCAAs, what was it like back then? Nowadays it's such a huge deal, especially at the D1 level. What was it like for you guys at that level back in the mid to late 80s, from 84 to 88?
Well, if you know Coach V, there were high expectations, right? So while we didn't take it for granted, it was expected that every time out, and that was practice, that was weight room, that was in the cage hitting, that you would give your all, right? And if you didn't, there was going to be somebody. Sometimes it was coach. Most times it was our captains and the older players to say, hey, you're not giving it your all today. And so, there's guys that came up before me. I mentioned Jim Ferguson and Roberto Giansiracusa and Cam Drew. And, as I'm coming through, you try to take a day off in practice in baseball, those guys are going to let you know about it. And so you did. And I think as a result, we got to be as good as we could be. We didn't win a championship. I think we finished as high as 3rd my freshman year. I think our team, our junior year, was probably even better. But, it was an expectation for excellence. every time you stepped on the field. And then over time, we built that in basketball.
You know, Kenny, that you just hit on something there that for our viewers, if there was anything that I'd like to drill down on now or in every conversation, when you've been a part of a winning program with those kind of expectations, it's something that you try to replicate throughout the rest of your life. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It's based upon a lot of other criteria and variables. But once you've had a taste of it, what you just described there, you know, when your teammates have certain expectations and they hold you accountable and you hold them accountable, there's nothing like it.
Oh, I agree. And what you learn, at least what I've learned, is sometimes you got to kick yourself in the butt, right? I mean, if you don't have you had a bad day at the office, or you didn't give your best and didn't prepare for a situation like you should, there may not be a teammate there to let you know about it. So you got to learn how to motivate yourself. And I think the time at UNH playing with the caliber of players got a chance to play with in baseball and basketball, and the coaches who got a chance to play with, and I think they instill that in you. You got to show up every day and be ready.
Yeah. If you're just tuning in, this is the Dr. Z and J.W. podcast brought to you by Provenzano's Deli in West Haven. Our guest today is Kenny Coleman, two-sport star at the University of New Haven, baseball and basketball, in our Hall of Fame as well. So, Kenny, after your time at UNH, after you graduate, you go to the minor leagues. You're in Birmingham there in 1994 when Michael Jordan gets assigned to the team. How did you hear about it? Tell us that story about how you heard that Jordan was going to be playing in the same team that you were playing, and what was your reaction?
Well, so it was twofold. So the 1994 season I played in AA in 93 and had a chance to win a championship with the Barons team in 1993. So I didn't want to be in Birmingham in 1994. I wanted to be in Nashville where our AAA club was. So I found out about the same time that we learned that Michael was coming to Birmingham, that I was going to Birmingham. So it was part disappointment. And then there was part realization that, hey, this is not going to be like any other season that we've been a part of. And it wasn't. I mean, it was. I couch it as it was big league all the way, from security to crowds to how we traveled to how we ate. It was much more big league than we had been the year before. So, we didn't find out until a couple of days before spring training broke. If you've ever been down to a big league spring training, you're down there for a month and a half and very little information flows out. Every couple of weeks, there's a group of guys who, may not make the cut and get released. But it really was kind of last day that we found out that not only I was going to Birmingham, but he was coming.
You talked about traveling in style. That was not the way it was when you were with Birmingham before. Tell us the story about how MJ ended up getting you guys a new bus.
Yeah. So for those of us who were on the bus in 93, the year before that, you learned that there were only two temperatures on that 93 bus. It was either freezing cold or burning hot, right? And so, you leave Birmingham in July and it's 98 degrees and you're on the bus for 12 hours driving to Orlando in 55-degree temperature. You leave with a towel on your head, a towel around your neck, jacket, and you may have gloves to be able to try to make that trip. So in 94, Michael lent his name to the bus company. Thrasher Brothers was the company, lent his name for advertisement. And so they ended up getting us a nicer bus. Some people think Michael bought the bus. He did not. But the Barons continued to lease it. They ended up getting a multi-year lease. And again, he gave me some free advertising and they gave us a nicer bus. The bus thankfully had temperature control. And then it had a place in the back where Mike liked to play cards or we played dominoes or whatever we did.
Kenny, how many games are in a AA season?
Yeah, 140 games. And they're split right down the middle, 70 home, 70 away. We were in the Southern League during my 2 years in Birmingham. And so there's some great talent. And it's like that in most minor league leagues. But for us, the Blue Jays were always really good. Their franchise was in Knoxville, and the Huntsville Stars was an Oakland A's franchise. They had great talent coming through in the 80s. Same with the Nashville Express. They had the Twins. They had some really great talent come through too.
This is something that probably never would have come up, J.W., but we're going to do so many podcasts. We're probably going to talk about everything known to man in the next year. I love minor league baseball. If I can go to a AA or AAA game, I'll go, or single, you name it. I just think there's a purity to it. These guys playing for the love of the game and hopes and dreams, and they're darn good players and darn good baseball. So, you can't be a sports fan without watching Bull Durham 10 or 20 times. How similar was your experience to Bull Durham?
It's very similar. I'm going to give you a different story, Dr. Z, since you love minor league baseball. This is a true story. I don't think I've told this story very much. So this will be your value of baseball story. So in 1994, we had one brawl. And that brawl was actually started by Mike. And so we're playing the Jacksonville Suns, who at the time I think was a Mariners franchise. And it was one of those games where their big guy got hit twice. Our big guy got hit twice. Guy slid in late at second base and, kind of ticked people off. You had the San Diego Chicken was in town at the time. For those of you who remember the Chicken, there was a wedding proposal that day. And so in the bottom of the fifth, we're coming in to hit. And Mike's playing left field at the time. So he passes by the pitcher, and they kind of have words back and forth. It's, hey, screw you. No, screw you. And so he goes in the dugout. The guy warms up. And yours truly's leading off. So before I lead off, he steps off the mound, yells back into the dugout at Mike, gives him one of these, right? Mm-hmm. And steps back on the mound and hits me in the back. And so the video footage, it probably was the fastest I ever ran to get to the mound. And so the first guy out the dugout is Michael. He comes flying over the pile. The brawl goes on. I mean, it's one of those brawls that went on for seemed like 10 minutes. It started at the mound. Then it went to third base. Then the guys in the bullpen came out. Then they're brawling over by the dugout. And so, Dr. Z, to your story, the guy who ultimately hired me for my first job in Birmingham after baseball told me that he came to that ball game, and after that ball game, he decided to give our owner $20 more. He said, "This is more entertainment than I paid for."
I love it. Kenny, I got to ask you, I don't want to lose this thought, because your stories are so entertaining. I think we could go the rest of the afternoon. Tell the producers to just let us roll, whether anybody's watching or not. But, you keep talking about Michael and his competitiveness, and that story alone, it underscores it. I think of different coaches in my life that I've been around, the Bill Selfs at Kansas, the Bill Snyders at Kansas State. And while they did it in two very different ways, that competitiveness is what made them great. It's they couldn't. We talked to Jim Levitt recently on a podcast who was the head coach at South Florida that built that program. These guys are just relentless. You can't be in a conversation with Bill Self without him trying to win it's just a conversation. You'll end up thinking you're in a debate about something. As I watch this documentary about Michael, it seems like he's that guy too. Regular conversation into a debate. You go, I didn't know I was in a debate, but he taught me in basketball, and you're a basketball player as well, to value every possession. I don't care if you're up by 40 or up by 2 or down by 2 or down by 40. I mean, he is jealous of every possession. And as I watch Michael on this documentary, it seems like that's exactly who he is.
Oh, there's no question. We would play cards for no money. We'd play a spades game where, it was really to pass the time. And I mean, if he won, he talked more smack than you wanted to hear. And if he lost, he was ticked off enough where he wanted to play again. Every time.
There's times I look in the mirror and, I have friends who think I'm their most competitive friend, but I feel inadequate compared to some of these people, because I feel like at some point, being human, you'll stop. But the Michaels of the world, the Bill Selfs, the Bill Snyders, they don't stop. There is no telling them to put the cards down. There's no telling them that it's time to quit. They just won't.
Well, and what they'll do is play games with themselves to stay competitive. So, I mean, it was often coming out of batting practice, that Mike would look at me and go, all right, let's see who hits the ball further today in batting practice. $20. was like, Mike, $20 is a lot for me, brother. I'm a broke minor league baseball player. $20 is a lot. He said, all right, well, $10. Okay, we'll do it. So they, to your point, Dr. Z, I mean, they play games with themselves to stay in the moment, stay competitive, stay focused in almost whatever they do.
Yeah.
Kenny, as competitive as MJ was, he really did want to fit in with you guys, right? There was no air of this elitism of who he was, correct?
Oh, that's absolutely correct. Yeah, he rode the bus with us. He stayed in the hotel with us. My roommate and I at the time did an awful lot with him on and off the field. So I got another short story if you want to hear it.
Please.
It reminded me of how hard it is for Michael to be Michael. So we're in Greenville, South Carolina. We get in off the bus, 12:30, 1 o'clock. Typical routine was you'd go eat, and then you'd be at the ballpark at 5 o'clock or 4:30 for batting practice. So Mike calls down to my roommate and I out the blue and just says, hey, let's go get something to eat. And like, Mike, you almost never leave the hotel. He said, I feel like getting out today. So George Kohler, who you saw in the documentary, his best friend, Mike, Kerry, and myself, we go to the mall in Greenville, South Carolina. And I mean, we walk through the door at the mall, and the first person that sees him falls to their knees, like they can't believe it's him. And obviously the rest of that time is spent with people following and wanting autographs and all that. But I couldn't believe the first person was. Wow. He looked. It was a teenager. Looked again, and basically fell to his knees, like, oh my God, I can't believe it's you. That kind of fame's tough.
Yeah. Jim Carrey has a quote, and it's really kind of depressing. I'm a huge Jim Carrey fan. J.W. and I end up talking about movies on this podcast all the time. It shows where our brains are, right? Our level. And it kind of disappointed me when I first read it until I understood a little bit more of Jim Carrey and the things he's gone through. It was something to the effect of, I wish that everyone could become rich and famous for a period in their life so they could realize how miserable it really is. That's depressing. I don't think Michael felt that way, but the point is, these people we look up to and think, oh, wouldn't it be great to be them? It's really hard. It's a hard go publicly.
Yeah, and I think we heard it in the documentary several times, right? There's a price to fame. Yeah. I got a chance to see it up close in 94.
Yeah. Okay, one more question, J-Dub. My brain's kind of got me going here.
Go for it.
Back to the minor league baseball enthusiast. I had this book that I gave away, and I wish I had it right now to reread it. And forgive the title of it. It's called Where Nobody Knows Your Name. And it's about a series of characters, real guys, baseball manager, several players, et cetera, that go up and down the ladder, through the levels of minor league ball up to the majors and back. And the point I took away from this was people have no idea. We watch Major League Baseball, and we remember, for me, George Brett, who played third base for the Royals for decades, right? Or I could name the starters for the World Series champs back in the 80s for the Royals. But you don't see that anymore. Guys move around. But even back then, we tend to remember the guys who just stayed there. But something like 80% to 90% of the Major League ball players go up and down. They don't go and stay. And, unless you really are a little bit of a minor league enthusiast, unless you've read a book like that, you don't realize that's how the game's played. We lock in on these few stars who seem to be permanent.
Yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. I got a chance to play for 7 years in the minor leagues and got as high as AAA. And, not only do guys move up and down in the organizations, they move and then around organizations. And so, there'd be locker room talk of the 3 second basemen, the guy in AAA, the guy in AA, and the guy in A-ball, who's going to get there first. And you look up and, one guy gets hurt, 2 guys get traded, and it's the kid from rookie ball. You never know. And so you got to kind of always be ready because, to your point, I mean, guys move sometimes of their own volition, sometimes not.
Can you talk about that? And I'll toss it back to J-Dub. The differences between the A's balls and how they're kind of used by the parent organization, what their role is within the structure.
Yeah, sure. So AAA is the highest. It's the next level below A ball, then AA. Then there's 3 different levels of A: high A, what they call mid A, and then they call short season A, where the kids who get drafted in June, they'll go play a short season from June to August or 1st of September. And then there's rookie ball. So I'll go back up. Rookie ball tends to be your high school draftees,
Mm-hmm.
many of the kids that come from foreign countries. It's your younger kids. They're somewhere between 16 and 20, and they're playing against each other, just trying to get used to, being away from home. I mentioned short season A is typically your college draftees, and it may be some kids who graduated out of rookie ball. Then you make your way through A ball. It gets more competitive as you move up. Double A, since there's only one for the entire organization, tends to be a pretty small funnel. You got 22 players that kind of make it, and it's usually a combination of guys who've proven they could play A ball. Sometimes it's guys who come in the other direction back from AAA that they want to give one more year. And many times there'll be, if there's guys hurt and rehabbing and what have you, they'll stick them in Double A because it's really competitive, right? The kids are now in their 20s, early 20s, some mid 20s. They're not only talented, they can use that gray matter between their ears better, right? They're throwing 3-1 breaking balls, 2-0 breaking balls. You don't really see that much in A ball. And then AAA is a combination of prospects who they think are going to make the big leagues. They've proven themselves in AA or in the A ball, and so they're moving straight up. And there's a combination of guys who've been in the big leagues 2-3 years. Dr. Z, as you mentioned, some guys have gone up and down, and they're keeping them around because either they want to see a little more out of them, or they've got a specialty that the big league club might need at some time. So it is an interesting dynamic, it's not always linear, right? Some guys can jump levels. Frank Thomas, for example, he was a White Sox guy when I was there. He played at high A ball, played in AA for half a season, played AAA for half a season, and was in the big leagues. So it's not always a full season linear like some might expect.
Kenny, you were in the minor leagues for 9 years, I think you said, if I remember correctly. And, you get up to AAA, you're knocking on the door. And as you mentioned, with all this player movement, sometimes these decisions are made for you. How did you know when it was time to walk away? And what feelings did you experience because you spent so much time and so much energy and money, obviously, chasing this dream, and you have a great time to be able to be in the minors. But when it's time to walk away, how difficult is that?
Oh, it's tremendously difficult. And you see some people stay, 3, 4, maybe even 5 years longer than they should, right? They come out as a high school draftee. They played 7, 8, 9 years. They're now a 30-year-old kid with very little professional experience trying to figure out what's next. For me, I feel fortunate. My last year playing baseball was probably my best in pro ball. And so I was playing AA for the Cubs, had a great season, scored almost 100 runs, stole 35 bases. It was a great season for me. And coming into the next season, the Cubs had signed 2 ex-big leaguers to the point where we're talking about AAA, kind of how it works. And so and they were Terry Shumpert, Brett Barbary, for those keeping score at home. And they told me, they said, hey, you could come back. You'd likely be a utility guy, which basically means instead of getting 600 at-bats to prove what you can do, you get somewhere around 200 at-bats to prove what you can do. And so when you finish with only 200 at-bats, there's always going to be a question in somebody's mind, well, could he do it over the long season? So anyway, I was a 27-year-old guy. My dad had always told me to make sure you have something to fall back on in case sports doesn't work for you. And so I feel fortunate I was able to walk away. I told the Cubs I wasn't coming back to that next spring training and went to work in Birmingham.
Yeah, what did you do after baseball? Because you've had a couple of careers. Baseball is obviously part one of the career. What else have you done since baseball?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So after baseball, I went to work for an economic development agency in Birmingham, recruiting new businesses into Birmingham. Did that for about 5 years. And then I joined Alabama Power at the time, which is a part of the Southern companies. It's the nation's second largest utility, and been there for 21 years. I've worked at all of the affiliates, had a chance to make it to a senior vice president, and I was president of one of our about a $350 million unregulated utility, and decided to retire earlier this year because one, they presented an opportunity for me to do so, but two, I've always had this bent on public service. And so I'm going to figure out what's next in that arena for me. So right now I'm heading our DeKalb Chamber of Commerce here in Georgia. That's a county of about 1 million people, suburb of Atlanta. And so I'm leading that chamber with trying to grow new jobs, new capital investment, and provide some great business services to almost 500 members.
That's impressive.
Kenny, I got a question. I can't let you go without throwing this one in there.
We didn't
just for us,
him, by the way. He just shows up once in a while.
Yeah, I just show up. Uninvited.
Power of the control panel right there.
Exactly. So, you have to, before you leave, you have to tell your best Coach V story. Come on.
Man. All right. So Coach V's retired now, right? So I can tell some of the better ones.
You could. Let's go.
Well, so I'll tell an easy one first. And so, Coach V, I mentioned earlier how it was always give your best every time you're on the field. And one of the things I remember most about him, man, was that he could be your best fan, right? He'd come out, baby Kenny, way to go, da, 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 and he could be your worst critic. So, I told one story not too long ago, man. I was going through one of those games. It was probably 25 degrees out and somewhere up north of New Haven. And, I'm 0 for 4 at the time. And, I'm getting up for my 5th at bat, which, I'm not so sure I was feeling real good about either. And here comes Coach V running out of the dugout. Swing hard in case you hit this son of a, you know what I mean? Thanks, Coach. That's exactly what I needed.
He was the absolute best. Still is. Classic. One of my favorite stories is did you play with Dante Palazzo?
No.
So Dante has this legendary story that down in spring training, and Dante got in trouble. Coach V taped him into his hotel room at night so he couldn't go out, right? Him and Coach Hank. So Dante's pitching, and Coach V says, Dante, get on the mound. Gets on the mound right there. It's inner squad. So Dante said, I'm warming up now. He goes, I pitched, 3 innings yesterday. He goes, I'm looking around. He goes, I don't see anybody warming up on the other side. And he goes, Hank, who's pitching for the other team? He goes, you are. He goes, I pitched for both teams. It's 250 pitches in the scrimmage.
So if you got time, I got one more Coach V story that's pretty funny too. If you got it.
Yep.
So you mentioned spring training, made me think about it. So somehow in my 4 years, so I would finish basketball, depending on how well we did for the season, somewhere pretty close to when we would be leaving for spring training in baseball. Sometimes that was a day or two, sometimes that was a week or so, right? And so somehow every time in spring training, somebody on our team managed to do something stupid. And that something stupid usually led to a 5 a.m. run on the beach. And so we went to Daytona Beach every year. And this one year, I don't know, Coach V must have stayed up late or something. So, the beaches in Daytona, the cars can drive on. So he would be in a car or a van or whatever he had, sticking out of the sunroof, yelling at us while we're running at 5 a.m. There's one time he's like, you SOBs, get in the water. And we're like, did he say get in the water? He said, get in the water. So, we're running and guys are like barely in the water. He's telling them, slow down the truck, run them over if they're on the beach. So he wanted us to get waist deep in the water. It was freezing, 5 a.m. And he just had his head out of the sunroof having a great time.
Oh, well, Kenny, I know it's so hard because there's so many legendary stories that we just can't tell, right?
That's right.
We had to pick the nice G-rated one. So
there you go.
Good job. Thanks, boy.
Hey, Kenny, real quick before we let you go, I'll give you one last question. Just to piggyback off what Rob was saying, and I know you've talked about it as well. All of your experiences at UNH, everything that you learned, how did those lessons apply to what you do in the real world, or how have you succeeded in the real world, whether it be minor league baseball or in your secondary career?
Well, yeah, thanks for that question. I think if I was boiling it down to an elevator speech, I would say relationships matter. And what I found since UNH, that there were people that I met in UNH or who met me, and I didn't know that they were even watching or had an eye on me, who've helped me over the years, helped me find jobs, helped me get connected with people in the sports industry. and have become my best friends in life. And so, while you're 17, 18, 20 years old, you may not really be thinking about it, but your 360-degree relationships all around you can make a huge difference in your life. So invest in them.
It's great advice. Kenny Coleman, Hall of Famer, University of New Haven, two-sport athletes, and baseball and basketball. Kenny, thanks for joining us here on the Dr. Z and J.W. podcast.
Oh, I had a great time, guys. Thanks for having me. I'd love to come back. So appreciate what you guys do for the university and for sports up there.
Well, Kenny, this was really fun, and we need to get you back around the student athletes. You've got so much to share with them from all these perspectives. So please, that's a standing invitation, and you'll probably get tired of us before it's over.
I doubt that, but so I look forward to that. I'm not sure when, obviously with all the pandemic and all, but next time up, I'll definitely try to give you a heads up, let you know next time we get up.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Kenny Coleman, thanks very much. Dr. Z, another terrific guest. I loved what he said about you. Sometimes you have to kick yourself in your own butt to motivate yourself. Not that he needed a whole lot of motivation, but I guess even sometimes the best of us need that motivation. That's great advice, along with what he just said. What you get at the University of New Haven, the connections. It's not what you know, it's who you know.
That's right. I'd only heard of Kenny before this, and that was just such a fun time. It felt like we were with him for 5 minutes and the show's over.
Yeah.
I think we've been on a roll the last few of these. We've had, he and Jim Levitt had a lot of similarities in terms of energy and stories, and we need to keep this going. I hope our viewers are enjoying it. The inside outside of UNH that we promised, I think we're able to deliver right now, and we've got a long list of more to come.
Yep, and that's the great part about watching or listening to the Dr. Z and J.W. podcast. You get access to people that you'll never get anywhere else. And we've been very fortunate, as you mentioned, with some of these guests we've had recently. And only the best is yet to come. I want to correct myself real quick. Kenny played 7 seasons. I said 9 seasons. 7 seasons minor league ball. Career 258 hitter, 12 home runs, 92 stolen bases. But as we mentioned, he's a two-sport athlete, or was a two-sport athlete at UNH in our Hall of Fame. Dr. Z, I had to look this up. Kenny is still the program record holder for assists and steals.
Really?
Yeah.
All these talk about basketball.
No one's come close to touching him on either of those.
Wow. Can you imagine just to at the college level to play those two sports? I mean, baseball's a huge skill sport, and basketball's so much athleticism. To be able to do both, we that's and when you're talking about assists and steals, that's a unique kind of athlete. The quicks that he must have had had to be pretty special.
No question. Hall of Famer at the UNH, and as we can clearly see and hear from today, a Hall of Famer in life too, Dr. Z.
Absolutely. Well,
all right. Well, that's going to wrap up our show for today. I know we're running a little late on time, but Dr. Z, as always, thanks for being here, and appreciate all that you do for us here at the University of New Haven and your leadership. And Rob Thompson, our producer, did a great job. He knows Kenny. He's been able to reach out to him, and as you said, Dr. Z, we look forward to having Kenny on campus at some point, when it's safe to do so. Hopefully in the very, very near future.
Well, you know what, J-Dub, it's a beautiful day in West Haven, the home of the University of New Haven. And when we hang up, I'm going to go hit the beach.
Sounds like a plan to me. So we'll leave it at that. We thank Kenny Coleman for being here. We thank Provenzano's Deli in West Haven for being our sponsor, for producer Broccoli Rob Thompson, and executive producer John Mays, and for Dr. Z. I'm J.W. Stewart. Thanks for listening and watching the Dr. Z and J.W. podcast. We'll see you next time.
No chippy.